Okay, so a couple of quick things. We're not meeting in this room on Thursday. Right? We're going to go down the hall to 210 to the computer lab where you will have the opportunity to work on drafts. Right? This, again, doesn't mean you have to wait until Thursday to start working on your draft if you have some sense of what you want to write about. But yeah, I'll be giving you time to work on it in class and to ask me questions while you're working. And the draft is going to be due Thursday night at midnight, right? So just a couple of quick reminders about the draft. One is that I'm going to be grading it based on completion rather than on quality, right? So I'm going to give you feedback, but the grade is going to be based on how much of it you get done. So to get full credit for the draft, remember, you got to give me at least 750 words. And 750 words that show that you are trying, right? Not like a page of analysis and then 2 pages of gibberish. Or, a page of just kind of repeating the same paragraph over and over again, right? So I want to see 750 words that seem to be moving in a particular direction to get full credit. If you don't get me 750 words, you'll still get credit. You just won't get, you won't get 100 on it, right? What else? Oh, the other thing I wanted to go over with y'all quickly, because we haven't had to do that in this class yet. Do y'all know how to do MLA-style citation?
That's where you put it in and then do like the quotes where you got it from and then put the link. Or you talking about throughout?
Yeah, actually both. So in the body of the paper, right? Whenever you quote from your source, before the period, you give me the author's last name and the page number, right? So if you're quoting from, Rousseau, like something he said on page 74, right? Rousseau 74, period, right? Easy, right? One of the reasons we use this method of notation in undergraduate classes is because it is probably just about the easiest, right? Now, when you're doing the works cited page, the basic format you're going to use looks like this, right? So you take the author's last name and first name, the title of the book, underlined or italicized, followed by, if you have it, the name of the editor or translator, the location in which it was published, the publisher, and the date. So for this book, right, if you're using Rousseau as your primary source, your citation would look like this, right? Rousseau, Jean-Jacques, on the social contract, does this give us the name of the translator? Yes. Translated by G.D.H. Cole. Garden City, New York. Dover, 2003. So this seems like easy, basic stuff, right? But I want to go over it just to make sure you know how to do it correctly. Yes?
For editor, we put both?
Um,
These two editors.
No, because this is a translator, just give the name of the translator. That's all you're going to need here. The editor is more important, like if you're like taking something from like an anthology. So like when you take the 2000 level lit class next semester or next year, you're probably going to have to work with an anthology. So it'll just be like a whole bunch of poems and stories and plays all in one book, written by different people. So that, in that case, it'll be important to cite who the editor is, right? Because the editor is the person who compiles the whole thing. But in this case, because it's just a single book in translation, all you need to give me is the translator's name. Yeah.
What day are we supposed to be meeting to it too?
That's going to be next week. So starting next Tuesday when we do peer review. And actually, let me note there, right? So we're going to be doing peer review in groups of 3. That's actually one of the reasons I'm moving you all to that group starting next week. Because there's 7 people in that group, there are 2 people in this group, so then we can have good groups of 3. You won't be here on Tuesday?
Because I forgot that we started at 2.
Uh-huh.
So I thought I'd be done like our regular class, but I had an appointment I can't.
Okay. All right. Well, that's. I mean, you've got perfect attendance up to this point, so I'm not especially worried about you. But okay. So, but it's just so a week from today you can't make it.
Next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well,
So I just give you my stuff beforehand for the peer review.
Yeah, you can do that, and I can assign one of the groups to. I guess that'll be then just a group of only 2 people. And I'll give them your stuff too, and I'll make sure it gets back to you. Right. Anything else? But yeah, I want to make sure you know how to do this yourselves, because I know that like MS Word and Google Docs and whatnot, like they have a function that'll do citations for you automatically, but it never does it correctly, right? And it's not that hard to do it by hand. So if you have any questions about citation, if you forget how to do it or you run across something you don't know how to cite, the best place for you to go is the Purdue OWL website. Right? Just type Purdue OWL MLA citation into the Google search bar. It'll take you right to the site. And it'll give you the basic formats for everything and a whole bunch of examples, right? Okay. So that's all we need to discuss in terms of citation. Do either of you have any questions about the paper? Going once, going twice. All right, and moving on. I do want to say, too, that over the last couple of weeks, I've noticed that the free writes y'all are turning in have been getting both longer and better. So y'all are getting better at this, right? You are improving as we proceed. So let's talk a little bit about Book 4. And then we'll see if we can kind of try to sum up what we think Rousseau is doing or what we think he's arguing in the book as a whole. So, what did y'all write about today? What did y'all decide to pick?
Religion.
Okay. Explain.
I wrote from the third religion.
About
men getting like 2 codes, 2 legislation.
Okay.
Something like that.
Okay, what page is that on? That's okay, right. I've actually just opened up right to it, 93. So here it says, there's a third sort of religion of a more singular kind, which gives men 2 codes of legislation, 2 rulers, and 2 countries, renders them subject to contradictory duties, and makes it impossible for them to be faithful both to religion and to citizenship. So why did you pick that? Why did you pick that quote, Morgan?
That's not the quote. It's okay.
Oh, it's not?
It's with the third, but I picked the one that says all that destroys social unity is worthless.
Oh, okay. It's a little further down. Okay. Right.
But I see it come from the third.
Okay. All right. So what interested you about that quote? Like, why did you pick
I was
it?
trying to, like I said, I like to keep my stuff, like my free rights, kind of going some of the same line.
Yeah.
And most of the time when I read this, all he talks about is unity and togetherness. So
Okay.
I just
Okay. That whole idea. I mean, the whole idea is about like a kind of unified society working together for the common good, right? And this third kind of religion, he seems to think is detrimental to this, right? So let's try to break down how he describes these three kinds of religion, right? So it's all on page 93, right? So what is the first kind of religion? What is religion 1, as he describes it?
has neither temples nor altars nor rites, and is
Uh-huh.
confined to the purely internal cult of the supreme God and the eternal obligations of morality is the religion of the gospel, pure and simple, the true theism, where it may be called natural, divine, right, or law.
Okay, cool. So let's try to break this down a little bit, right? So how would we sum this up, this first kind of religion? What seems to be most important in this kind of religion? And what seems to be missing from it? If there are no temples or altars or
You miss
rites,
some priests.
what's that?
You miss some priests.
Yeah, you don't need priests, right? If you have no temples or altars or rites, good. Good observation. Yeah, there's no special class of people, right, set apart in control of the religion, right? So he calls this natural religion, right? Like, so this is religion in the state of nature where everybody's still equal and we haven't built any social structures yet, right? So it's not what we would call organized religion, right? And yeah, as you said, there are no priests. What's religion number 2, or religion type number 2?
The other, which is codified in a single country, gives its gods its own tutelary patron. It has its dogmas, its rights, and its external cult prescribed by law. Outside the single nation that follows it, all the world is in its sight.
Infidel, yep.
Infidel, foreign, and barbarous. The duties and rights of men extend for it only as far as its own altars. Of this kind, were all the religions of early people, which we may define as civil or positive, divine right or law.
Okay, so
Those are complete opposite.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, we call it like civil religion, right? So yeah, okay. So what have we got now that we didn't have in the natural
Priests.
religion? Okay, you got
Temples.
priests, right? You got temples. You got all of this stuff, right? Yeah, you got this whole big organization, right? But what else is weird about this second type of religion? What other characteristics does it have? For starters, who follows it?
A single nation.
Yeah, it's a religion that belongs only to a single country, right? So, I don't know how familiar you all are with the Old Testament, but we see, like in the Hebrew Bible, right, that these various nations all have their, like around Israel, all have their national god, right? So there's the God of Israel, but there's also the God of the Ammonites and the God of the Moabites and the God of the Canaanites and right, all of these other neighboring peoples, right? And people outside of a particular nation don't worship that God. And that particular religion is particular to that particular nation, right? So what we have here in this original civil religion is an organized religion, right? But that's bound up with the state. Right? You might, kind of think of like the imperial cult of Rome the same way, right? Like the way they were supposed to worship the emperor as a god, right? That was kind of like the one common thing that bound all parts of the Roman Empire together. Everybody was expected to worship the emperor as a god, right? So it's all part of. So the religion is part of the machinery of the state, right? Does this make sense? Everybody with me? Right. So church and state completely intertwined. Now then, what's this third type that you were talking about, Morgan?
Third religion of a more singular kind, which gives men two codes of legislation, two rulers, two countries, renders them subject to contradictory duties, and makes it impossible for them to be faithful both to religion and to citizenship, such as the religions of the Lamas and of Japanese, and such is Roman Christianity, which may be called the religion of the priest. It leads to a sort of mixed and antisocial code which has no name.
So what's happened here in this third type of religion?
Like they're trying to go for both the natural and civil, but it's not working.
Okay. So only combining the worst features of both. Okay, yeah, I think that's to some extent what's happening here. But I think like what's more important is the way the two structures diverge here in this third type, right? Which we might give the name of like independent religion, right? So the religion develops a structure that is independent of the state, right? Now this is something that's kind of enshrined in our Constitution, right? That we tend to think of as a good thing, separation of church and state, right? For us, this means that no particular religious group can impose its will on the entire population, right? But what does Rousseau think is bad about this particular system? What's the problem? What's Rousseau's goal at all
Because it
times?
destroys social unity.
Yes, it destroys social unity. Right? This disrupts the general will by doing what? What does being a citizen of a state and also a member of a church independent of the state do, according to Rousseau? What does that? What conflict does that create for you?
It leads to sort of a mixed and antisocial code.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because essentially, what's being like what within you is being divided. If you are both a citizen of a state and a follower of a religion that's not part of the state, according to Rousseau. What does that outside religion set up? Let's think of it this way: like, what's the basic structure of our government? What do we have? What's our government look like? Okay, we got those three branches, right? They're supposed to be co-equal, right? Executive, legislative, and judicial. Yes. And in order for the general will to be enforced, these kind of three branches and the people all have to be in harmony, right? Now let's look at the way, say, because he uses this example, the way the Catholic Church is set up, right? What's this? Do any of you know kind of like what the structure of the Catholic Church is? Like what the different authority levels are? Who's at the bottom? Okay, you kind of start with lay people at the bottom, right? Parishioners. Above them are priests who are responsible for administering a single parish, right? And those priests are assigned to churches or parishes by bishops who, might, control like a whole city or a couple of counties, right? Those bishops are subject to cardinals and archbishops. Who are responsible for larger swaths of territory, like in some cases even a whole country, right? Or a whole region. And then who's at the top?
God.
Well, arguably, but at least in the earthly structure of the Catholic Church, who's the supreme authority? Who's at the top?
The Pope.
Yes, the Pope. So, if you are an American Catholic, according to Rousseau's logic, it means that you are subject to these two separate authority structures, right? Now, this authority structure in, 18th century France would have looked a lot more like the national authority structure, right? Where, the king is on the top, and, then there are, dukes and, marquises and barons and whatnot below him, right? And then everybody else is a dirt farming serf. But the basic point Rousseau is trying to make here is that this type of religious structure essentially kind of makes the individual serve two masters, right? So it splits the general will by making you serve two different bodies that may have contradictory needs and desires, right? So essentially it tries to make you part of a second general will that's not a part of your state. Does this make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily asking people to agree with this, right? I think, Rousseau's views on religion are a little bit idiosyncratic, and they change a lot over the course of his life. This is written at a point at which, he is broken with the Catholic Church. And I think we also have to remember context here, right? About that three estates theory. What would have been kind of why might he have such a bad attitude towards the Catholic Church, given the way France was run in the 18th century? Yeah, you do actually have church and the church and the nobility working in concert with each other, right, to maintain their privileges. And this could be seen, arguably, by someone like Rousseau as the church interfering in the nation's business, right? Kind of sticking their noses in where it doesn't belong, and thus kind of dividing up the general will, right? Kind of forming a wedge between the nobility and the people. So that's where kind of where this might arise, from context, right? So you were having a thought as I stopped you all writing. What was that thought?
I don't even
Hadn't quite formulated it yet?
I think I did, but we've been talking, so it kind of just left my brain.
I'm sorry. I should have asked it. I should have asked earlier. What did you write about, Jennifer?
I wrote about the election.
Okay.
You said there were two methods. One was, well, both of them are choice and line.
Uh-huh.
And you said how democracy is better if it uses the lot method because it has a small population.
Okay.
And I think I don't know how to say that word.
Which
The middle one?
Okay, what page are you on?
It was the beginning 75.
75, okay.
He said how that one would use like both. It would have like a mix of both.
Okay.
And monarchy wouldn't even use either because
Yeah.
the people don't have control of it.
Yeah, the people don't have a choice in a monarchy, right? The people have no control over who gets appointed to what offices. But yeah, in an aristocracy, yeah, you would use a mix of both, and you would use selection by lot in a democracy, he argues, right? Now, what is selection by lot? Do you all know what this means? Do you understand what he's talking about here?
Is it at random?
Yeah, that's exactly what he means. So it's like it's like if we were like trying to select like who would be the teacher in this class, right? And the three of us just drew straws, right? And whoever gets the short straw is the teacher. So why does Rousseau think that this is particularly suited to democracy?
It's small, so nobody really has more power than the other.
Yeah, because it works in a society where everybody is otherwise more or less equal, right? Yeah, this is a system that he thinks is particularly suitable when there's equality in terms of wealth, in terms of education, in terms of whatever else, right? Where people don't need to make an informed choice because there's not much to choose from between one person and another, right? So what about choice then? Choice is a means of selecting leaders. What about choice as a matter of like selecting leaders or officials?
Right here it say, for the conditions being then the same for all, and the choice not depending on any human will, there is no particular application to alter the
Universality.
universality of the law.
Okay, I think, yeah, there he's still talking, like, he uses the word choice there, he's still talking about selecting someone by lot, right? So that's someone selected at random, right? So like, if we're selecting people by choice, then what does that mean? How is that different from selecting someone at random?
I mean, you know who you want to be power.
Yeah, I mean, this is, basically what we do when we have an election, right? There are two, generally in our system, there are two candidates to choose from. You choose the one that seems less awful to you. And then whoever gets the most votes gets the office, right? Choice also, this can also be, if you don't have, the whole people participating in elections, you can also have, people in the aristocracy choosing, members to continue the government as it is, right? But yeah, the basic point here is, right, that this is, so lot is random. Choice is conscious, right? You are making a conscious selection between alternatives. So what else did you have to, like, what else did you have to say about that particular passage, Jennifer? That's basically it. Okay, well, let's try to think about what this has to do with broader themes in the work as a whole, right? So we've kind of already looked at the way the whole religion issue is focused on promoting unity within a people, right? Rousseau doesn't really much care what the specific religion the people follow is, right? So long as pretty much everybody follows it, and it doesn't have a structure that's independent of the state, right? What about this idea of elections? How does this contribute or take away from ideas of unity?
Because if you elect somebody, everybody's not gonna be on the same page.
Right.
So it's not gonna be unified.
Yeah, I mean, it's rare that anyone is going to be elected unanimously, right? So how does Rousseau deal with that issue? If the people are making a choice, but they don't unanimously choose the same person or the same law, how does he reconcile that with the idea of the general will? Can the general will be divided?
I was just gonna say something about mixed government.
Okay, but yeah, he's talking about government and the general will aren't really the same thing, right? So government is the body that's set up to administer the general will, right? So let's look on page 73. The section here on voting. There is but one law which, from its nature, needs unanimous consent. This is the social compact. For civil association is the most voluntary of all acts. Every man being born free and his own master, no one, under any pretext whatsoever, can make any man subject without his consent. To decide that the son of a slave is born a slave is to decide that he is not born a man. So we're all born free and our own masters, not subject to anyone else's will, right? So everything so in order to participate in the general will, right, we have to agree that we're going to abide by its decisions, even if we don't always personally agree with them. Now, on the next page, he says, apart from this primitive contract, the vote of the majority always binds all the rest. This follows from the contract itself. But it is asked how a man can be both free and forced to conform to wills that are not his own. How are the opponents at once free and subject to laws they have not agreed to? I retort that the question is wrongly put. The citizen gives his consent to all the laws, including those which are passed in spite of his opposition, and even those which punish him when he dares to break any of them. The constant will of all the members of the state is the general will. By virtue of it, they are citizens and free. When in the popular assembly a law is proposed, what the people is asked is not exactly whether it approves or rejects the proposal, but whether it is in conformity with the general will, which is their will. Each man, in giving his vote, states his opinion on that point. and the general will is found by counting votes. When therefore the opinion that is contrary to my own prevails, this proves neither more nor less than that I was mistaken, and that what I thought to be the general will was not so. If my particular opinion had carried the day, I should have achieved the opposite of what was my will, and it is in that case that I should not have been free. So, can y'all make any sense out of this? What is Rousseau saying you're actually doing if you vote in the minority on any question? Yeah, you're not actually following the general will, or you're mistaken about what the general will is, right? Essentially, you're reading the room wrong. And what are you mistaking what are you mistaking for the general will? What's the thing that he always opposes to general will? You can even see the phraseology, the same kind of phrasing in the paragraph here. If my particular opinion had carried the day, I should have achieved the opposite of what was my will. So if you vote in the minority on any particular question, what is he saying you're actually doing? What are you mistaking for the general will? Your particular opinion, right? Your particular interest, right? So remember that he always opposes those two things to each other, right? General will always tends towards the common good, right? Its opposite, particular interest, tends towards what's good for me. And your particular interest, according to Rousseau, will often not accord with the common good, right? What's good for you personally, or for your family, or for your particular faction, may not be what's good for everybody or what's good for society, right?
Okay, so you know how at the end on Candide we were doing like the verses, so this would be like general will versus particular interest.
Yeah. And yeah, this is one unity and disunity are one kind of binary we've explored. Yeah, general will and particular interest are another big binary that is kind of an animating force throughout the whole thing, right? You know, the natural law versus civil law. That's another one that you could probably lean on a little bit, right? And Rousseau seems to want, right, a civil state, a civil structure that is in accordance with our natural rights, right? That preserves and enhances those, rather than one that kind of denies that they exist. But yeah, no, there are a bunch of binaries that Rousseau sets up in his argument here that I think you could probably draw on if you wanted to use them to write a paper. This is just one of the biggest and most important, right? So, do y'all have any questions about this before we move on to something else? How do these arguments make you, like, what do you think of Rousseau's arguments?
I don't think I would have made it back then.
You wouldn't have made this argument?
I would have been
Yeah, and I mean, and, you know, Rousseau did get, he got hounded out of a couple of different countries. You know, he was persona non grata in France for a while. And he fled to Scotland, where another philosopher was willing to put him up for a while. They had an argument, so Rousseau snuck back into France and ended up back in Switzerland, where, you know, people tended not to have strong enough opinions about things, I guess, to really argue with him. But yeah, I mean, he certainly paid a personal price for expressing a lot of these opinions, because they do seem counter to what kind of the prevailing opinion among the powerful was, right? But how strong do you think these arguments are on the whole? What do you think, for example, this idea of the general will?
I think you put a lot out of between today and back then, so it's a lot of stuff you can say right now.
Yeah, I mean, these are ideas that we still talk about, right? That we still discuss. Like, I think, like, we're getting
You're not using the same.
What's that?
I said it's still we still talking about. You're just not using the same.
Yeah, we're often not using the same terminology, but we've built a lot of our society on similar structures, right? And this is actually another thing to, like, the idea of building a society, right? At what point does Rousseau think a society requires the making of good laws? What's the only point in a society's development where making good laws is going to help shape it and make it endure? I mean, the general will is kind of like where he thinks the laws come from, right? But let me put it another way. Does Rousseau seem to think that reforming the laws in a society that's badly structured will work? If a society has already got to the point where it's corrupt and decadent and unfair and tyrannical, does he think changing the laws is going to make any kind of difference?
Wouldn't it be no? Because he even stated how if you try to go back to your natural rights, you can't go back. So
Yeah.
Yes and no.
Yeah, you can't reform, you can only start over, right? If you set up bad laws at the beginning of a society, Rousseau argues there's really no going back. Right? All the reforms that you try to make are going to end up failing because you set up your society on a faulty basis, right? So it's important to Rousseau that if, you know, you are living in a bad society, you kind of just have to let it run its course and start over again with something new. Something that is built on a better legal structure that actually expresses the general will. Because all the reforms in the world aren't necessarily going to bring a government back in line with the general will if the laws you started with were bad to begin with, right? So one other thing that I do kind of want to hit on, and this is actually gone kind of fast. I only got about 10 minutes left since we started early. Why do you think he admires the Romans so much? What does he seem to like about the Romans? I mean, he spends like a full 2/3 of this part of the book, right, talking about the Romans. What's so great about the Romans?
The way they're structured.
Okay, yeah, he admires the way their society was structured, right? And what does he think is so good about it? What does he seem to think it encouraged? Maybe it's a good idea to kind of back up a second here and give you all a quick definition. So I'm going to assume, and Rousseau never defines this, he just assumes you know what it means. Do you all know what the comitia was? When he talks about the Roman comitia? Okay. I figured this was probably the case. So, comitia in ancient Rome were citizens' assemblies. So, the entire citizenry, or in some cases their elected representatives, would gather to vote on a set of issues, right? So the comitia did things including electing magistrates. They could enact laws. They could create or dissolve alliances. Declare war or peace. Decide in cases of capital punishment. Should Tiberius Claudius be executed or publicly whipped or whatever? And yeah, these were their basic functions, right? So what does the comitia kind of look like to us? Like, who do we assign most of these functions to? Who in our system has the power to do most of these things?
The president. They declare war.
Yeah, the president actually cannot declare war or peace, right? The president cannot officially declare. This is one of the reasons why the Korean and Vietnam wars were police actions, right, rather than wars in the technical sense. Who has to declare? Who has to actually declare a war for it to be official? Who has the power to do that? Congress has to issue a formal declaration. Yeah, that's one of the. That's part of that division of powers between the branches, right? So while the president may be commander-in-chief of the military, he does not have sole control over it, right? He doesn't have the power to actually declare war with anyone.
The president really don't be in power. It be everybody else. He's just the face of the United States.
I mean, our president is actually more powerful than the president is in most other democratic systems, right? So most other democracies are actually kind of based on the British model rather than ours. And this is in part because, the British colonized half the goddamn world, right? So, their model was what was exported most readily. But in a parliamentary system, the legislative branch and the executive branch aren't separate, right? The executive is actually a member of the legislature. So, for example, in Britain, the prime minister, who is the leader of the legislature, he, as the head of the party that controls it, or the coalition that controls it, is also the head of the government, right? So he also sets the government agenda and enacts laws and so on and so forth. So yeah, they don't have that same kind of separation of powers. Now, I was about to say the Queen just passed away. The King now actually has to sign bills into law. But that's really all he does, apart from wave at people in parades and occasionally christen a ship or open a shopping center. The King's functions are now largely ceremonial. But yeah, we assign most of we don't assign most of these responsibilities to a single body, right? Some of them are executive branch responsibilities, for example. Some of them are judicial branch responsibilities, and others are done directly by the people, right? So, for example, local magistrates we typically elect ourselves. For the Romans, all of these functions were performed by citizens. And what this means for Rousseau, right, is that these choices were being made most clearly in accordance with the general will, right? More so than is the case in just about any other society. So the thing that he admires about the Romans is that he thinks that this is the society that most clearly got the concept of the general will and applied it most rigorously and accurately by giving so much power to these citizen assemblies and committees, and by not housing too much political power in any one social class. Now, he does point out some places where he thinks they went wrong, but by and large, his tone is one of near total admiration, right? So for Rousseau, right, Romans was good. Loved him some Romans. So we're almost out of time here. Let's just try to sum up here quickly what some of the kind of major ideas we saw running through this were. So we already talked about some of these binaries, right? Unity and disunity versus disunity, right? Natural versus civil. General will versus particular interest.
Roman versus Catholic.
Okay, well, Roman Catholic would actually be kind of the same.
Same thing.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah, but I think we've got that kind of three-part split with the religions, right? And I think we can kind of file that. There are other things we could do with it, but one thing we could do is file it under the whole kind of unity and disunity thing, right? That a unified national religion is better than the kind of three-part or two-part structure, right? That the church in his time represented. Are there other themes that we see running through this, whether they're binaries or not? Do you notice any other kind of patterns running through the whole book, or particular concerns that he keeps coming back to? any other weird ideas that seem to bind this together, whether they're part of the main argument or not.
Well, I think this could go further, like, with unity and disunity, but power, because he doesn't like, well, it shows that, you know, like when one person has all the power.
Okay,
so
yeah.
Kind of go back to like separation of the branches and all this stuff.
The idea, like, how do you spread power through a population, right? And I think one thing that's kind of interesting, and one thing that you might want to think about in those terms as well, is that he seems to think that the best way to spread power out seems to be dependent on context, right? Right? For one thing, right, what's your level of civilization? Right? Some forms of government, and some types of decision making, he seems to regard as best for societies at a relatively low stage of development. Others, he seems to think, are more appropriate for highly advanced societies, right? Right, location and climate seem to be one of these things that he regards as important for figuring out what kind of government is best suited for a place. And even things like fertility and economics, right? You remember how he said that monarchy was best suited to places where food is produced abundantly because you don't have to figure out how to share limited resources, right? So this could actually make for kind of like an interesting argument, right? It's like the way he sorts things into particular contexts, right? But yeah, I mean, any of these are things that you could probably use as the basis for a decent paper about this. Okay, so we actually are about out of time now. Does anybody have any questions, any further questions or comments about Jean-Jacques Rousseau or his idea of the social contract? All right, then we'll let you go, and we'll see you on Thursday in the computer lab to work on papers. And I will also
Where's the computer?
down the hall, room 210.
Okay.
I will also say that I will be available to look at drafts this week if you want me to. Like if you want me to see something, before Thursday. And remember also to make use of the Writing Center.